Thank you for joining me, helping me with my interviews. So the first, I put all the questions and such in the chat in case like you don't have it next to you. But yeah, first question is just an introduction of who you are, very minimum, just state your profession or title. But if you want to as well, can you also explain like how long you've been playing music, composing music for? So yeah.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Thank you for asking me to take part in the interview. So my name is Liz Lane. I'm a composer. I'm also a senior lecturer in music technology at the University of the West of England. My full title is Senior Lecturer in Music Technology, Composition and Performance. So I also work at a couple of other universities as well, at Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance in London and the Open University. So I do quite a wide variety of different things, all of them part-time. So I suppose it's what you call a portfolio career, which a lot of musicians have. So composition is my main thing as a musician. I also have done quite a lot of arranging work in the past, and my instruments are French horn, percussion and piano. I started playing the piano when I was about 3 years old, and I took my grade 8 when I was 13. And I started playing both the French horn and percussion by default, really. I had been learning the violin when I was 6 years old, but I didn't get on too well with it. I played a bit in the school orchestra and so on. So I decided to give up for a term, and someone suggested, why don't I take up the French horn so that I could understand how brass instruments work for my composition? And I took up the French horn. I loved it so much that I never gave it up. And I studied it at university, and then I played professionally for a number of years in the southwest area. And percussion, I got into the National Youth Orchestra when I was 11 years old. And at that time, they didn't have a sort of a pathway for composers. They put composers in the percussion section, and I was absolutely awed by what I saw there and totally taken with it. And I thought, that's it, I've got to take up percussion lessons. So I did, and I ended up playing professionally in the southwest area as well. So lots of different things really, but composition is now my main thing. I do a lot of commission work, and I have done for a number of years. I'm very busy doing many different projects, increasingly brass band and community projects, also choir as well. But I've written for all kinds of ensembles and groups, from orchestra to solo pieces, and my music's been performed UK, and most recent piece abroad was in the Netherlands. That was just over a year ago, and I've got a piece coming up being performed in Boston in the USA in a few weeks' time. So very varied.
Very varied. Next question, really. Looking back to the first question, you mentioned how, your first answer, you mentioned how composition is pretty much your main, like, what your main profession is, what the main thing you do. So linking to that, is there a certain genre that you are highly knowledgeable of, or is it ranged?
I would say that if I had to put a label on it, I would say contemporary classical.
Uh-huh.
But it's so difficult to really say quite what it is, because I was trained as an orchestral musician. That was my background. But my musical interests are really diverse, and the more I'm working as a lecturer, the more I'm sort of becoming more interested and more involved in all kinds of different sorts of music. And my journey as a musician has been, to date, it's been really fulfilling. I've done a lot of different things. But yeah, classical music is my thing, really.
So so contemporary classical, right? So that's the kind of main idea. So with your experience with classical music in Bristol, do you think there's a growth in classical music, or in your case contemporary classical music in Bristol, or do you feel like it's kind of steady over the years?
I suppose I can speak from a certain personal experience of knowing the music in Bristol from when I was quite young to now. When I was probably about 8, 9 years old, my parents took me to concerts at what was then the Colston Hall regularly, probably about once a month. So I kind of assimilated the orchestral repertoire through that, and I remember them, particularly the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra, who spend a lot of time at Bristol Beacon now, but Colston Hall then. And we used to have seats in what's known as the choir, so you'd actually be behind the orchestra and really, really close to the orchestra. And so for someone who just started learning, French horn percussion, to actually sit there right by the percussion at the back there and actually see over the players and watch their music was a really wonderful experience. And I learned so much from that. And I think that's quite, traditional, if you like. And then as I got more involved as a performer, I had the opportunity to get involved with lots of different types of musical concerts, often playing for choral societies or opera, that kind of thing. A lot of orchestral concerts, professional orchestras that would get together on a Saturday afternoon to accompany a choral society, or amateur orchestras who needed an extra player to help out where they were short, that kind of thing. And that's still happening, although I'm not involved in that scene. But I think classical music, and again, this is a really broad generalization, I think it has diversified, and the opportunities are less sort of set in stone. Whereas when I was very young, it was kind of quite formal, whereas now perhaps more informal. It takes on a lot of other different cultures and ideas in my own music too. One of the things I'm involved with is something called Symphony, which is a combination of brass band, soprano voice, and RSVP Bhangra, who are a Bhangra band based in Bristol. 30 years or so ago, I would never have dreamed of doing something like that. And I just love the sort of fusions of different types of music and seeing where that takes me. And it's a journey that's been going on for the last few years, and we're gradually developing the project. Today is the anniversary of the last live concert I was involved with before we all had to stop playing music together. And that was something I would never, ever have dreamed of, sort of 20, 30 years ago. And it involved a performance of my piece of mine called Innovation 216, under the wings of Concorde at Bristol Aerospace Museum. And it was just completely awesome. There were 280 musicians aged about 7 to 70, and a whole program of music. My piece, which lasts about 8 minutes, lots of other different pieces of music from choirs and bands. We had the chair of Aerospace Bristol, who's very involved in the aerospace industry, who talked to the audience, and we even had an ex-Concorde captain who came along and talked to the audience as well. So it's that kind of concerts where I feel, I'm not even sure that informal is the right word, but it's not the sort of formal orchestral music that I would have grown up with. It's something that's involved, that's much more inclusive, if you like. The other thing that I've been involved with a lot the last few years is Open Up Music, based in Bristol, which is the charity that facilitates young disabled musicians to play as part of an orchestra. And they have a lot of school orchestras throughout the country, and the National Open Youth Orchestra which is the UK's, no, it's not just the UK's, it's the world's first disabled-led orchestra for young disabled musicians. So a lot of wonderful things that are happening in Bristol, which I've had the pleasure and the honour of being involved with.
That's really cool. Now, when listening to your to the multiple how classical has changed over time, it kind of helps like support the idea that culture has kind of impacted how like classical has changed. Because when talking to another interviewee, when we were talking about culture, I learned that culture can really vary over the years. So I can't really specify it as, oh, it's someone from a different country coming to another country giving out their like traditions. It's also like the change of different like everyday things, the way we are inclusive. So the idea that classical music hasn't really like gone down or grow, it's more like evolved due to the culture change, due to what's now accepted nowadays. Like probably something in the 50s may not have been well accepted. Well, things now may not have been well accepted in the 50s, and due to that culture change, like how we are more inclusive to obviously people of color, people with disabilities, it kind of is quite nice to hear that classical music and how we interact with classical music in Bristol in particular has evolved, like using the aerospace. Is it an aerospace convention, or is it like some sort of...
It's the museum. It's quite near UWE, Bristol Aerospace Museum.
Okay.
And the Concorde that's there, the Concorde that we played under the wings, is the last ever Concorde ever to fly. So Concorde 216, a very special aeroplane.
So actually that really helped me, because it's kind of like helpful to know that classical music in Bristol has changed, but not like in a way that it's gone down or like it's grown like significantly or such like that. It's kind of adapted due to culture change, which is kind of hard to like specify into one thing, which is why I'm glad I'm making this website, because I now kind of see how it's not all about like it changing completely or it going up or down in like interaction or how popular it is. It's also how like it can develop over time due to how people's thinking has changed over the years.
Absolutely. And you still have the traditional orchestral concerts at well, there haven't been any at Bristol Beacon, but at what was the Colston Hall, you have the traditional concerts there. You have the big orchestral concerts with the overture, the concerto and the symphony, but what I've noticed over the years is that they've got much more of a theme to them. They've got something that kind of sells them in the media. It's kind of often has a story behind it, a concept, rather than here's a concert, come and listen to it, wonderful. It's got something that kind of draws it together. Often, and St George's as well. Obviously, smaller concerts there, but I mean, this goes not just for Bristol, but all concerts really. They've changed from being sort of just there to kind of having more of a story behind them, and maybe from a marketing point of view to bring concepts together and portray them with something that is going to sort of be not just music, but something that tells you more about music.
I can understand why you say contemporary classical now, because it can vary so much as well.
Yeah, I mean, contemporary classical it's a label which probably isn't even a very accurate label. I suppose it's someone who's writing music which is happening now, if you like, but it could the styles of music written could be incredibly diverse. So yeah, it's a difficult label, just like classical music itself is a difficult label.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of right. It's quite wide range, especially with someone who doesn't listen to a lot of classical music. I can also get confused between like classical music and then what's Baroque music and romantic. I usually just combine them all to be classical music. But yeah.
Well, there's a sort of overarching terminology of classical music being all kinds of different genres. And then you've got the classical era, which is a particular period in time. You have Baroque, classical, romantic. It's one of those strange idioms in the language.
Yeah. I barely remember any of the like eras. I just assume anything from probably over 300 years ago or so, like that's classical at this point. But yeah, so you kind of mentioned the Bristol Beacon and St. George, but I was going to ask you, do you believe that do you believe places such as the Bristol Beacon, the Lantern, St. George is one of a prominent reason why classical music is still pretty much prominent in Bristol and alive?
I think so. I mean, it's very hard to talk about Bristol Beacon because we don't know where it's going to go. I mean, I know it as the Colston Hall and the sort of concerts that would have happened there. It's very exciting, hugely exciting about the plans that are going to happen there and the type of concert hall that will exist, and just very, very exciting going forwards. St. George's, they had a refit quite recently, and they've got a beautiful, beautiful new foyer with a bar as well.
Oh.
And that was only open in 2018, I think, so that's quite recent.
Yeah, it's fairly recent.
And they're used for quite a lot of Radio 3 recordings. You've got some fabulous acoustics there, but of course quite a smaller place. So both venues, of course, at the moment being totally shut. I know St. George's was able to open for a little while in the summer. They had a few outdoor concerts. I think they might have managed to do one or two things inside. It's all there for the taking. You know, once we can get back to doing live music again, and once the Bristol Beacon is open, I think it's going to be hugely exciting for Bristol, and the way it, the way that music will move forward.
Fair enough. Sorry, going kind of just let me just quickly expand on the question 4, because you mentioned how because obviously we have Bristol Beacon undergoing changes as well, and then you also mentioned how St. George has went through changes in 2018. So let's just go further back in time. Yeah. Do you believe that without when they didn't change, was it more very classical orientated and kind of focused more on traditional types of music? Do you believe it's the change that kind of made it more I guess more expansive, the types of music they play? Or yeah,
I think Bristol Beacon, Colston Hall, has always been really diverse with the sort of events that happen there. Not just music, but I remember when I used to go to concerts, there used to be signs up for wrestling and things like that. I don't know whether they do wrestling still. I think without those two venues, it would be difficult for classical music to have so much of a home, because there would be nowhere for large orchestral or even sort of medium-sized ensembles to perform. So I think both are extremely important. The one thing that Bristol doesn't have, and probably is one of the only major cities in the country, and doesn't have its own orchestra.
Oh.
If you look at major cities throughout the rest of the UK, they've almost all, if not all, got their own orchestra.
As in London Orchestra?
Yeah, as in London, you've got London Symphony Orchestra and Royal Philharmonic Orchestra and others based in London. You've got the Halley Orchestra based in Manchester. You've got City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra in Birmingham. But yeah, Bristol's never had its own orchestra. There was a time when it was considered that the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra would make their home in Bristol, but that didn't happen. There was also a time when Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance, it was mooted that it might move down to Bristol, but that didn't happen. Oh, yeah. So Bristol, for its classical music, relies on people visiting. It doesn't have a permanent orchestra. Yeah, so Bristol doesn't have a major symphony orchestra, but it does have the Bristol Ensemble, who have led a lot of wonderful music making over many years. They used to be the Emerald Ensemble, then they changed their name. They're led and directed by Roger Huckle, who's a very well thought of violinist. So they do have a smaller professional orchestra, but not a major symphony orchestra.
Ah, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Next question. Okay, so because in the last one we've talked about classical in the past and like nowadays, I also wanted to ask, how do you see classical being in the future? Do you see any future of it, I guess? But also, based on our last answers, your last answers, I can see you mention how it could expand even further. So, yeah, what would be your answer for it?
I think it will continue expanding and evolving. I think when the Bristol Beacon opens up, there will be so many possibilities that probably haven't even been thought of now for it to evolve and flourish. And with St George's already, having been regenerated, that is another fantastic place for classical music. But then let's not forget, there's lots of other venues throughout the city which are used for classical music as well, from churches to smaller halls, and anything from small groups to larger groups. There was something recently which was celebrating an anniversary of, I think it was the Lark Ascending, and that was put on in a hall in North Bristol somewhere. I'm trying to remember where, because I think simply because the Bristol Beacon was closed. So there's all, many different venues, but obviously the main ones are Bristol Beacon and St George's Bristol. And then you've got people like John James, who is absolutely brilliant at bringing classical music to life. So not only have you got the changing role of marketing with classical music and the way that the concerts are sold and the stories behind them, but you've actually got someone like John James, who is Bristol based, who will actually give a pre-concert talk and share his thoughts, share his concepts about music in advance, and sometimes online as well. And I think that's another way that classical music has been made more, I'm not too sure about using the word accessible, but just
Interactive?
vibrant.
Oh.
Sorry, what was that?
Oh no, I was just thinking, is it like more interactive then, or when you say...
Yeah, interactive is a good word. I think interactivity with classical music is has become more and more vital to generate it and keep it going in a journey. And you're bringing together this wealth of wonderful music that's been written for centuries, along with music that's been written now, and with vast different combinations of musicians who can go about playing it. So I think the boundaries, the genres, they're being constantly blurred. There's the traditional, and there's so many other different sort of threads and offshoots and ways of combining the music and putting it across and sharing it with people. And I see that continuing to happen in a lot of different ways. And all online as well. Because that's been another way that has brought music to people who might not have seen it over the last year. A lot of online recordings, people all over the world, big symphony orchestras who have made their music, their concerts accessible sometimes for free, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. And people have joined together to do virtual recordings. So there's a chance for music to be seen by people who might not otherwise have engaged with it. So I think that's been an exciting new way forward.
So based on our last answers, I kind of expected that answer of the future of classical kind of expanding and evolving and changing and like kind of interlocking with other types of genres and just topics to create, completely new themes and such, that in ways that we don't even know yet. So that's quite cool to think about that. This is probably the reason why the politics and culture needs to be my biggest theme, because this goes onto the culture of like the internet and how it's so easy to spread out, like compared to the 20th centuries in the 90s. Internet wasn't as like accessible. Like it wasn't until like the late 80s, early 90s, internet was more accessible to like a normal household. And then even then it wasn't until like 2000s and such where we got like social media and it was so easy to like contact people around the world. So I think that's like a very big thing. And even now, like in the last 70 years, or at least in the last 30-40 years, the culture of internet has expanded greatly. So we don't know how like big it will get by the time it's like 2050. So
yeah, absolutely,
there's a lot of weight.
And another thing I've seen change are venues where music is performed, and whereas when I was a child, you went to a classical concert, and it was quite sort of formal, and it was probably at a concert hall. Whereas now there's lots of different things going on, like lunchtime concerts for people to have sandwiches while they have their break, and concerts in different venues, which would be completely not thought of a few decades ago. I mean, I did a concert in Bristol Museum and Art Gallery in 2014, which was really special because it was commemorating the centenary of the beginning of World War I. And we actually had an invited audience, but at the same time the museum was open. So we were doing the concert and there were people listening there in a sort of more formal way, but there were people who were just visiting the museum and just sort of wandering around. And I remember the concert going on and someone came down the beautiful steps in the museum and sort of stopped. They heard the music and they weren't sure whether to walk on or not. And so you had that sort of, that kind of interaction again, as you use that word. It's a really good word. So people were interacting with the concert in different ways, formally sitting down, just happening to be around. There was also a balcony, so some people were just sort of hanging around on the balcony, and those kind of involvement with music, I think is quite exciting.
That's actually quite interesting to think about, because I never actually thought about like how classical was when it was best to play classical music in the past. It was more for formal events, as you mentioned, but now it's more everyday things, like how you played in the museum for like a formal audience, but for people passing by, and how it can be used for like lunchtime, and how obviously back on the internet theme, how you can listen to it on the internet, you can see live actual like concerts online as if like you're there. But yeah, that's quite cool to think that. I guess when I was first looking into classical, because I didn't have a lot based in Bristol, but I guess my first thought was probably may die down a little bit due to the fact that there's so many other genres, but I never actually considered the fact that I've forgotten the fact really that there are other ways, there are other reasons why classical music's played. There's other forms of media, forms of interactions with classical music, which is quite cool. So it's hard for it to die down.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, years ago, Handel wrote his water music, which I believe was played on the River Thames, and I mean that was several centuries ago. But actually, the more formal concerts of classical music only came in this country. I think it was the 18th century, if I've got that right. That's when concerts started to be kind of, you paid your money, you came along and you listened. Classical music was more the preserve of perhaps the rich before that. So it was really in the 18th century that if I remember my music history from when I was a undergrad correctly, that's when concerts sort of took off. And it's kind of stayed up like that for a lot of years, but it was just a few years ago where the members of the Bristol ensemble reenacted Handel's water music on the water around the Arnolfini watershed.
Oh.
Actually got on a boat and performed it. It was part of a festival, I think.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
When you mentioned how it was only beginning of like around the 18th century since the whole idea of concert happened, let's go just skipping a bit further into the future, just around the 50s. Do you think it was still in a formal state, like everything was still okay. Was it, would you say it was like around the 21st century it became more informal, if you get what I mean, in the sense that
gosh, that's an interesting one. I think it probably, use that word again, I think it probably evolved. People started thinking of new ways to share classical music, new ways to put it across, new ways to get different audiences, and create programs that were vibrant and different, and as I said, had this sort of story, these connections behind them. And I think that has just sort of been a gradual progression rather than being something that happened, say, 20 years ago.
This one's this question's a bit vague, but I still want to ask it now. Question 6, it's asking, do you believe there was a point in time from the 50s onwards that was an important factor of classical music in Bristol? I feel like it's a bit vague now considering like the other answers, but do you still feel like there was a very important set of time for classical music in Bristol that was like important?
Gosh, an important time.
It can be based on your experience as well.
I would have said that the regeneration of the major concert halls would have been quite a sort of defining factor. With St George's being having their beautiful new foyer and being renovated a few years ago, and then with the Bristol Beacon, then of course was it about 10-15 years ago that the Colston Hall had their new foyer? That would have changed things as well, because before that the Colston Hall was the old part of the building, and you used to go in to the right of where you've got the cafe now. You used to go in at the old part of the building and go up some steps, and there was a bar. I think that's where the Lantern is now, actually, where the bar used to be. Then they had the whole of the foyer built, and that opened it out to people, because all of a sudden you could just be doing the shopping in Bristol and you could pop in and have a drink, have a cup of coffee during the day, or lunch, or something like that. So that would have opened out the music to people in a far greater way than actually just sort of saying, okay, here's a hall, right, we go to it for a concert. You go and sort of chill out and have a cup of coffee or some food. So I think those factors in what the halls have to offer would be an important thing to classical music. I suppose Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra have been a key part of classical music life from a symphonic sense, because they've been a regular orchestra for many, many years. That's not exactly a particular time that's important to classical music. So no, I would have said the venues probably the most relevant from what I can see anyway.
When you think about it, I'm going to keep on with the less formal way of like going to listen to classical concert compared to like the past, where like unlike in the past where you pay money to sit down and listen to classical music, people can just pass by, take a drink and be like, oh wow, this sounds very nice, and listen to it as well.
Have a look at the proms in London, because they're unique.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
Because they offer music for people in a very informal way, because you pay your money, which is under a tenner, and you queue, you come in, you stand either in the arena or up in the gallery, and you listen to world-class music.
That's true.
Very cheaply, so it's the sort of thing that people just sort of wander into on their way back from work.
Oh yeah, why not?
Bring a book, bring their knitting, bring a bit of food, and it's a very different concert going experience, and it's been happening for many years, lots of decades. Bringing music, very fine music from across the world, with very cheap tickets. You get the expensive tickets as well, where you go and sit down and you pay for the seat. But if you're prepared to stand or just sort of sit on a rug on the floor or something,
then
amazing music.
It's like a very it's like those summer festivals where like you're on the field, but in this case it's classical and you're in a nice concert hall, but you're still standing, you're still listening. That's quite cool.
Yeah,
actually, that reminded me, there was a concert, and it was very summery festival part, like kind of that summery festival kind of aesthetic where everyone's jumping and dancing, but it wasn't playing house music or anything. It was playing Mozart and very like old classical, and you just see all these university students going woo woo woo. It's like, that's quite funny. It's funny how they like adapted to like how kids listen, or how young people listen to music nowadays, especially in a public venue as big as like a summer festival and such like that. Instead of listening to a concert hall and sitting, they're just like jumping up and down listening to like Mozart, and they're like singing along with it. It was just quite funny to watch. I was like, how times have changed.
Actually, that sounds a bit more to me like perhaps how music used to be before it became more formal, because as far as I can remember, concerts prior to the new tradition of concerts in the 18th century used to be people just used to sort of chat and talk and so on.
But then it became more like, let's just sit down and listen. I like the idea of the interaction and just like being able to talk and like do stuff while listening. I think that's also a normal concept with like people nowadays, like because the world's going so fast, we don't like to sit down in one place. We'd rather do other stuff while we're at it, which is quite interesting to think.
But another thing that's changed with classical music is that it used to be traditional that you only clapped at the end of a symphony or a concerto. But in more recent years, and this is quite a sort of contentious thing, there's been a bit of a trend to clap between movements, which some people don't like at all, and some people, obviously are quite comfortable with it, and that's evolved.
Oh, I didn't know that. Like, usually when it comes to like I guess in our case, well, me being like not knowing much about classicals, usually when like a song ends or when there's a huge pause, everyone's assuming it's the end, so it's like, oh well done, that was a really good piece. And I guess you never really because like with symphonies and such, it's kind of, well, I don't know much about them, but I do know there's like different movements, there's different parts that I guess nowadays we don't really know, we don't have often in music nowadays. So once the song's stopped, it's probably the end of the song, so it's the end and we're like, oh wow, that's great. But yeah, that's quite cool to think that in the beginning, like earlier on, it would be tradition to clap at the end of the symphony, so that would be like an hour in or something, depending on how long the symphony
20
is.
minutes, half an hour, sometimes
20 minutes?
Yeah.
So I would never assume that. I'd probably be like clapping in between every single song and be like, oh wow, that was really nice and such. But yeah, this really does focus a lot about culture, about how things have changed over time. Barely anything about politics, but how that's pretty interesting to know. So yeah.
And the other thing is that people never used to clap in churches.
Oh yeah, I know that.
No, for concerts. It's only in the last 10, 20 years that people have clapped at the end of pieces of music that have been performed in churches.
Oh.
So when I was first involved performing, and I performed in a church, get to the end of that, that's it, nothing. Whereas now people are happy to clap.
Oh, I guess I like the new idea of just like clapping at the end in church. Let me do the last question and I'll let you go.
Right.
Oh, this pretty much summarizes everything. So, based on your opinion, do you believe that politics or culture from the last 70 years could be the influence to how classical music is today?
Very much, yes.
Yeah.
Because culture has changed and shaped and formed the involvement of classical music in Bristol. And politics has defined things like, what kind of venues we have, even the perhaps the type of music or the musicians that come to play here. So I think they're very much interactive. Particular political classical issues that I remember are the thought of Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra becoming Bristol's symphony orchestra, and that was talked about some years ago but didn't happen. And also Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance coming down from London, and I think it was planned that they were going to be somewhere close to where the Lloyd's building was. And these were all things that were discussed about and very much sort of politically involved, and for whatever reason they didn't happen, but they were key parts in Bristol's classical journey to where it is now. I mean, politics behind what's happened with Bristol Beacon must be huge. I have no idea what's gone on, but I mean, it's the hall inside was not in a very good way, and the fact that somehow they've managed to raise the money to bring in a 21st century absolutely stunning hall to make use of the older parts below, which have never been used before, and all the things that they're planning on doing is just fantastic. And of course St George's as well, and the Hippodrome, because loosely I suppose you could say things like musicals that go on at the Hippodrome.
I never really considered the Hippodrome as well. I guess it is mainly for theatre and such, but I guess in some sense it does follow the idea of classical music. Pretty much this whole conversation ended up with the background of how things have changed over time. Not like specifically in Bristol, like the culture in Bristol, mainly like around the world, but like it has greatly affected Bristol music. So that's like a really interesting thing to know, that like there's been political changes, like how the Bristol Beacon is, how once Colston Hall has been changed to Bristol Beacon because of like politics, and how like it used to be named after someone who's been in charge of a slave trade that's responsible for so many lives. And obviously with the whole Trinity, Trinity
Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance.
Yes, sorry, I'm very bad at remembering names, but yeah, and also with the Bournemouth Orchestra, so Symphony Orchestra, and how they wanted to be, how they were considering of making it Bristol's. So I think it's also very key to think of that as well, because like I guess it's also with those changes, if it actually did go through, it could have changed classical a little bit more differently than it is now. So
yeah, I think you're right, but I also think that the music scene in Bristol, which I know a lot of students at UWE and probably Bristol University come because there's such a sort of exciting, vibrant music scene. I think that will have had an influence on classical music as well. The things like the Old Duke, the jazz, and all the various sort of clubs and scene that goes on in Bristol. It is all a rich melting pot of music, and it can't help but influence each other, I don't think.
That's true. There is a lot of influence between each other and such. And I guess we're also with the culture, like how how you mentioned how different genres influence each other is also like with you, how you're working with the RSVP Bangor group, how like their genres have influenced classical music as well, and how it's just been mixed together. And it's quite cool to think that it's not that classical music is gone, it's just the fact that it's evolved because of this integration and such like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you've got other cultural organisations like Bristol Festival of Ideas, run by Bristol Cultural Development Partnership. I mean, the sort of things that they put on, the talks and the poetry and so on, it all overlaps. And I think if someone was to make a study of each city in the UK, it would be incredibly fascinating to see how different cultural and political influences affected the music scene.
Oh, London will be a very big topic, that's for sure.
Oh, that's for sure.
That's going to be a very big topic. It needs its own website, not even a web page. Yeah. Okay, that is pretty much it. Thank you for helping me with this interview. I actually learned a lot more that I thought, because like, I guess when you have interviews, it helps you like verify, oh, it's actually because of this situation, or it's actually influenced by this and such like that. So that was really helpful. So thank you for helping me with this interview.